I'm Tim Kittro, and here to bring home the bacon are Big Ryan the Fat Guy.
Yeah, but that shirt does give you good circulation. What up, YouTube? It's Big Ryan 9000 with the Fat Guy coming at you with the NFL picks against the spread for week one of the 23-24 NFL season. Fat Guy, we were pretty much right on the button, 50% last year. We just lost ATS-wise by one game in the Super Bowl, us taking Philly as the 1-point favorites, even though Kansas City pulled off the win, I believe, by 3 in stunning fashion. Either way, we're still up 51.1% for overall. I can already see you're itching to get a word in.
Yeah, okay. So first of all, let's take that into consideration. 50-50 picking every game. What does that tell you? I think that's a celebration of line efficiency, if anything. 51% of years of doing this. I got to be honest here. This is going to be a bit of a heel revealing this year, because to be honest, I don't bet spreads. I kind of made that obvious last year. We did at the beginning. We did have a science to it, but that's any edge that may or may not have existed has most assuredly faded away. So now I'm like, the focus is going to be more on how can you find an advantage, right? And there is a story told among these lines and these line movements, and how can you use that information to perhaps derive an advantage out of it? Derive being a key word here, because I will be mentioning derivatives probably the entire season. Again, I don't. It'd be rare for me. I'm probably never going to bet a spread at close. I'm probably only going to bet openers. If I do bet, it'll still be very seldom. Derivatives I will be betting, though. Props I will be betting. And we'll try and get into the nitty gritty in terms of what that might look like from taking something as efficient. Because that's how, if unless you're very, very strong at modeling, which I would imagine there's only a few hundred people in the entire world capable of doing that, you need to look at something alternatives. And that would be something efficient like a spread market, which would pretty much has made us 50-50 since the beginning. So again, what does that tell you? If the juice is unbeatable basically in the spread market most of the time, again, don't quote me, and there are people out there, but why don't we use that to our advantage and kind of discuss some of those ideas regarding each game and why each game might look that way, and what you might be able to get from it.
All right, Fat Guy, on to week one, opening night, Thursday night, 8:20 p.m. Eastern time start between the Detroit Lions and the Kansas City Chiefs. Chiefs are 6.5-point favorites. A majority of bettors are on the Chiefs against the spread. Fat Guy, who you got?
Well, I'm gonna have to. This is the thing. Who do you really like? We're gonna take Detroit here. It is the number would have been 7, but here's another interesting thing. It opened in Pinnacle at Detroit -7 plus 110, and it's currently -6.5 -101. Now that's actually quite a movement. I mean, it's losing half a point, and you're losing tons of juice. Now, why has the betting market responded that way? I mean, this is an early line. It opened in June 8th at 10 o'clock. Seemed a little late. But it just stayed that way up until September 3rd. So, I mean, the juice did move around a little bit. Well, actually, juice moved around a lot. But you could kind of prophesize that perhaps this half a point has something to do with Chris Jones. So then what would that tell you as a bettor? That perhaps Chris Jones is worth the win probability between 7 and 6.5. Or if you take what's probably a better way of looking at it is taking the money line and kind of figuring out where it shifted, right? Now, the only issue with doing this is Chris Jones. It's not a binary system. Is he 100% out or 100% in? Probably not. It's somewhere in the middle. So how you can really learn from something like this is if some player is a good example would be the NBA season. Luka Doncic, they said he was suspended, and then they reversed that ruling. Well, the Mavs in that game went from -1 to -8, I believe. So that win probability, that money line shift would have told you how much Luka Doncic is worth towards that win probability. So perhaps if there's news that Chris Jones is out or Chris Jones is in, that'll give you a good idea what kind of value he brings to the Kansas City Chiefs. So if you were modeling, it would give you some sort of insight into what an elite defensive lineman would look like. As far as the game goes, it's a very high total, Big Rye. What
Yeah,
do you got there for me?
55 is the total for this game, which is passing pretty much every key number.
What Big Rye means by key numbers is he means numbers that have game totals that have finished at a high frequency. And 55, if you were to graph every NFL game, is on the tail end. I mean, I'm not going to count standard deviations here, but it's an unlikely number. Now, what could be derived from that type of information? Well, since when they make these numbers, a lot of it has to do with priors or previous iterations of games, right? So for low numbers, there are priors because of bad weather, but really high numbers, generally there aren't like games where like I can't imagine in probably less than, since we've been doing this, just a pure guesstimation, Big Ride, less than 5% with a total that high. Would you agree with that?
Oh yeah, for sure.
So that kind of information would give you that, like, perhaps that there's value in estimating here because it's a gray area. They don't have the volume, they don't have the data. So when they open a game that large, perhaps that there's a greater chance of a mistake. Whereas something, something that comes out at 45 or 44 and a half, those are games where it's going to be very, very difficult to gleam the cube, to quote a skateboarding movie from the 80s. On to the next one.
The next game is going to be the Houston Texans traveling to Baltimore to take on the Ravens, who are double-digit 10-point favorites at home. Majority of bettors are on the Ravens against the spread. Fat Guy, who you got?
Wow, this is about as popcorn as it gets in terms of line movement. It's -10 opening, -10 current, and that was on July 9th. So what is that? That's another very, very, very strong instance of probably a good opener. I'm using Pinnacle here because Pinnacle does offer the lowest juice. And so if you're a recreational bettor, even to give a free plug here, I highly recommend it. But if you're trying to make something of a go of it, betting with Pinnacle, you're not going to win very often unless you're an expert modeler. And if you're an expert modeler, like I said, you're one of the few, you're probably not watching this show. But thirdly, is you probably want to burn all of the rec books before you end up in Pinnacle's territory, where you can unload the clip and bet very high numbers. That in bookmaker.eu is probably the highest limits. But anyways, this game had very, very little movement. There's very little news about this game. The only point of intrigue too is like where they could get wrong, kind of like how I was mentioning in terms of priors with the Detroit Kansas City over under. There you have kind of a similar issue in terms, I would imagine, with rookie expectations, because not all rookies fit in the box, and I kind of feel like we're getting to a progression here where a lot of these quarterbacks, their athletic abilities are kind of matching, like, I don't know, significant passers. Like, they're not Terrell Pryors, let's put it that way. Like, they're not, like, they're able to run and gun, and I think that's harder to model, and it's harder to have a good idea. So, like, an edge too would be to kind of understand, like, what a dynamic rookie would look like in an NFL game, what effect they would have on a total. Maybe they're more apt to throw interceptions. All that type of thing could be looked at under a microscope, and you could find some sort of value there. I doubt you would be able to on a spread, but in the prop market, I think that there would be some holes, so to speak. So this game isn't super interesting to me. I'm just going to take Houston, double-digit dog. But again, this is a game that mirrors market efficiency.
Next up, Fat Guys, Carolina at Atlanta. Atlanta -3.5 at home. 64% of early bettors are on the Falcons. What piques your interest, if anything, with this game?
Brian Burns holding out. This is a key number too. It opened at -3, and it is on June 27th, and it is currently, that's a long time ago. It's currently -3.5. So I'm a little bit curious as to on Pinnacle. I'm kind of curious as to why. Like, is that a Brian Burns effect? Perhaps the total has come down 3 points too from opening, which is kind of interesting. So I'm wondering if that's another guy, because Brian Burns, you know, people could give out a power ranking list of defensive linemen or pass rushers, and it would be hard to argue that he wouldn't be, in at least the top of tier 2, if not tier 1. I'm not a talent evaluator, but it is a person of interest, let's say, on defense. He's, in my estimation, there's, other than quarterback almost always is going to have the most effect on a game, unless you have two quarterbacks of extremely similar caliber, which is quite rare in the NFL. You tend to just roll with one and have a handsome Chase Daniel as your backup. But in this case, like in most teams, like the left tackle or the if they have a prominent defensive lineman, that would be the person that puts the most adds or subtracts the most win probability. And I would imagine Brian Burns, aside from their newly minted quarterback, is probably the most valuable player on the Carolina Panthers. Now I'm curious to see, is he really worth this shift in win probability? Because Atlanta moved from minus 161 to minus 188. And here's another thing too. When people take, they have those calculators out there that give you implied probability. I'm looking this way because this is where my odds sheet is as well. I got 3 monitors going here. Head's going to bob in a lot of different directions. When you see minus 188, minus 168, well, there's 20 points of juice in between there. And that's very low, by the way. You can calculate what the over-round is. Over-round is what the bookie's commission is. So if you add up the implied probability of Carolina and Atlanta, my guess is at plus 168 and minus 188. It's always over-optimistic. It's probably, my guess would add up to like 104.4%, something of that nature, meaning that 4.4% is what the bookie's commission is, at least half of it, because they'd have to pay out one side. So, anyways, the true middle, there's lots of methods to do it. That's something I can't even give out on YouTube, which we will be alluding to in the future, is how do we come up with what the true number is? I mean, we could just say it's minus 178 plus 178, and you wouldn't be too far off. And you could probably use that as an anchor to bet, meaning if you got plus Wayne at 180 or better on Carolina, or minus 177 or better on Atlanta, you're probably making money. I could comfortably say if you got Atlanta minus 170, you're making money. If you got Carolina plus 190, you're making money. But you're going to want to anchor always to that true middle. So I'm curious, though, is, if the true middle, if the opening line was plus 145 for Carolina, minus 161 Atlanta, we'll just call it without me busting out the calculator, plus 155, minus 155, and it's moved to plus 178, minus 178. Is that gap in win probability, does that represent Brian Burns' effect on the win probability of the Carolina Panthers? Another food for thought. This is a week where there's a lot of strange contract things that I don't recall on key players, particularly defensive linemen. And unlike running backs, I think defensive linemen kind of have them on the skivvies, Big Rye, in terms of impact on the game. We used to do a little bit of, quite a bit of, we'll call it positional economics. And was pass rusher number 2, Big Rye, when we went through everything back in the day? And I can't imagine it's changed.
It would have been very, very close, but the quarterback had such a large gap,
Yes.
but rushing the passer was the second most valuable thing, whether it was a lineman or linebacker.
Yeah. Well, there's an interior, rarely interior, but like he means like a 4-3 D end or like a 3-4 outside linebacker. Not always. There are edge positions and obviously hybrids and stuff like that, but generally speaking. So, yeah, this is kind of a good example, and there's a few of those. We're going to get to Nick Bosa as well. I mean, I haven't followed every ounce and tidbit of NFL news, as I kind of find it a bit soap opera-y, but this is another instance where you can kind of derive value and kind of have an understanding of what a player is worth, because the betting market's going to tell you a whole lot more than what people on Reddit are.
Fat Guy, next up, the Cincinnati Bengals travel to Cleveland to take on the Browns. Browns are surprising 2.5-point underdogs at home. 43% of early bettors on the Browns. Fat Guy, who you got?
This is the most stagnant game that is come. Oh, by the way, our last pick was Atlanta. I didn't even mention that. I went on a tangent. We're going to take Cincinnati here. I like Cleveland. It's my team, but this is going to be a chalk pick considering chalk line movements. Opened on June 20th at plus 125. Currently, Cleveland plus 126.
Wow.
Moved 1 cent. 1 cent. So again, this is the theme of today's show and this year is it's hard to beat this type of efficiency. So in a chalk maneuver, we're going to take the Cincinnati Bengals. And I think going back on that, explaining equilibrium pricing, this is a good one. Again, if you could get Cincinnati minus 120, that you'd be printing money. If you could get Cleveland plus 140, you'd be printing money. So,
yeah, assuming there hasn't been any major changes.
Shift, assuming we're closing at this number. Good caveat, Big Rye. Or Big Rye 9000.
Fat Guy, on to the next game. San Fran at Pittsburgh. Pittsburgh plus 2.5 as well at home. 44% of early bettors. Very similar to the last market we just looked at. And is this the game where Bosa is?
Well, again, we don't know if he's going to play or not, and I'm not the best for that. And it's like this isn't a breaking news show, right? It's understanding the concepts is where we've kind of shifted to. I do bet I can't allude to the level I do it at, but it is. Let's just say it's very important to my lifestyle, and betting like these types of numbers, betting these types of markets is extremely difficult without some sort of without betting stale lines and stuff like that, or like if you knew Bosa was going to be out, this would perhaps have a lot of merit to it. They opened at as 3-point underdogs, the Pittsburgh Steelers, and now they're 2.5-point underdogs. And 3 is a very key number. So even if we look at money line, like see how the difference is that's only half a point, but they opened at plus 144, and now they're only plus 120. Now again, you can use the implied calculator to see the gap in that, and it's quite significant. And also too, there's another thing here. When I say significant, people will probably think like, oh, what's 5 and 6%? It's the world. When you're like in the old days with stale information, I mean, there's still angles I have that have enormous edges, but they're very special circumstances. If I bet a tennis match or I bet golf, I primarily bet tennis and golf. I know that sounds weird. First time I've ever said it on the podcast. Mind you, it's my first year of just focusing on those two things. You're looking for a 1.5 or a 2% edge. If you get a 4% edge, it's very exciting, and I can count on these two fat hands with 10 digits that I've probably got less than maybe 6 or 7, 8 or 9% edges, and they though as soon as I bet them, it was always a max bet, and the line would move at said recreational book. So when you're talking about edges, you're trying to make like 2%. 2%'s a good return, but then also too think of it conversely in investment terms. Like if you get, what's a return on a Vanguard, Big Rye, 8% a year? Is it something like that?
Anywhere from 5 to 15% on average.
Right. So then we'll just take the middle here. We'll take 10. That's probably good. It might be 8 conservatively, but let's just say 10. That's 10% over an entire year. We're talking about 2% that gets.
It's a world of difference. It's a huge difference.
That's in 5 days, let's say. If you bet right now, it's 6 days from now. So think about that. And also too, if you use some sort of Kelly Criterion style bankroll management, you were able to grind these edges out, you would use 2% compounding. So I think that's worse than a loan shark. 2% compounding a week, that's incredible value. Of course, it's not scalable, and you get to an area where you can't bet your whole bankroll because they won't let you. And believe it or not, that's another thing for someone not versed in it. You can't just go down and bet $1 million. There are a lot of tennis matches they won't. There's a sports book that won't let me bet more than $100 on a golf matchup between two golfers. It's incredible. You get limited and stuff like that. So liquidity becomes an issue. I know I'm detracting from the whole thing, but a lot of these concepts are going to be glossed over. And we're going to find a way to convey this information in a concise and educational manner. But I do have to gloss over a lot of these subjects in terms of ideas to look out for and ideas to think of. So is this line Pittsburgh plus 2.5? I think this is probably, my guess is a Nick Bosa, 40% playing would probably be my guess. But that's kind of the intrigue too, is seeing the gap if he is confirmed in or out, because he does have a contract issue. So the Brian Burns one, the Chris Jones one, the Nick Bosa one, these are very, very, very interesting spots.
Yeah, all
here.
of them have, it's, between 2 to 4% difference in win probability with, it might not all be just that one guy playing in this game, but as far as Fat Guy looking at it from an outside perspective, there is correlation between those guys possibly not playing and the lines moving from what they opened at in June.
I do want to add one more thing as an exercise. Since we said it's not a binary, this has some sort of probability, indirectly added to it as to whether Nick Bosa or any of those three guys I just mentioned are playing. What a good idea would be is to find a game where any of these guys go from if we're lucky enough, I don't want to curse anybody, but say they go from 100% healthy to out of nowhere, then you'd be able to measure that binary possibility. But then what you could do mathematically, you could figure out what percentage probability that they are playing or not. I guesstimated 40, but if we knew what the full binary was between of the implied probabilities of not playing to playing, then you'd be able to measure when they're on the fence, what stance does the book take? And then if you knew they were not playing or playing, you'd be able to really know what your expected value is, because you'd know where the line would move in either direction. So just some food for thought.
And it's funny because we're glossing over the picks. We took Pittsburgh in this game. But the information that guy is talking about is so much more valuable than any one pick could be. On to the next one. Arizona Cardinals at the Washington Commanders. Almost called them football team. Commanders -7 at home. We all do, but hey, this is where we're at in the NFL. Commanders -7 at home against the Cardinals. Fat Guy, is there anything interesting about this game, about the market that led up to this game?
Yes, there is. This is another strange one in terms of the total is not historically low, but it is low, and it's gone down a couple points, but not that many. It's gone 2, but then you're gonna say it's just 2 points, but 2 points in a 40-point game, that has significance, right? And part of it is, I would imagine, Washington going from -250 to currently -250 open on August 1st to currently -325, is the starting quarterback is presumably Josh Dobbs, who didn't play at all in the preseason and was traded for a 7th-round pick from Cleveland. So since we've been watching football, has a team ever signed their starting quarterback in between end of preseason and week 1? Big Ride, do you recall?
I'm sure it's happened, but it's very few and far between. And just to put some mathematical perspective, this line opening at 40 and moving down to 38 is almost a 7% difference, which is that's enormous. A big move. That's a big
enormous.
Move.
It's enormous. That's why it's deceiving when you see 2 points. But what is the value of those 2 points? It's not like, if the Detroit game goes down to 53, it's not the same thing. It's not. Those points are valuable. It's hard to score clearly between these two teams. I mean, point in case, we have Josh Dobbs versus Sam Howell. And I like Sam Howell. Looked cool. Cost me a fortune in that Dallas game last year, but that was a fun ride, right? But in terms of win probability, this is also significant. -250 to -325. It has to do with that. And but I want to know what their baseline was. Why did it shift so much? Maybe it's the only guess I can come up with is a Colt McCoy. Is that the drop off? Perhaps there could be other factors. I believe Arizona has traded 2 players, and I think one of them were a starter. So I'd have to go dig more into it. But this is kind of indicative of the tanking style Arizona Cardinals, and it's just such a bizarre movement or bizarre move to trade for your starting quarterback and release essentially everybody else. I have a enormous bet riding on this game. It's on a prop. I probably won't. I'll reveal it next year, but I don't want to give out this angle because I worked really hard all summer on it, and I can't give it out. I can't give it out, but there is something very, very interesting in this game that I'm gonna have to cliffhanger it, but the pick's gonna be Washington, uh, and I'm kind of curious how this shakes out because you if this might be an interesting game where like probably the most unknown team in terms of performance and what they'll look like is Arizona, and I would imagine there's a lot of books that have look ahead lines. This is a team where you might be able to see the decline or the surprise. So this is like when I talk about, again, no priors, like there aren't that many teams that have looked like or that have that type of unknown factor that the Arizona Cardinals do right now. So maybe if you look closely, you might be able to, get ahead of a good price, well, a week or two in advance. That is all possible. So we're going to take the Washington football team. I actually picked the team, actually said the pick aloud this time. And move on to the next one, I guess.
Next game is going to be Tampa Bay at Minnesota. Minnesota -6 at home. Majority of bettors are on the Vikings. Fat Guy, what kind of movements have been made in this market, if any?
Not the over-under hasn't moved at all. Minnesota went from -285 to -258. I'm sure that probably has something to do with negative news that's fleeting my mind. There's been the lowest amount of entries for movement I can recall since going through. So not that much action. It hit a high of -290 and a low of -255. So you always want to see that too. Whenever you're looking at line movements, like obviously closing line has the most efficient price, but sometimes you don't, the opportunity to bet closing line from an efficient market versus a rec book with an inefficient market, that opportunity doesn't exist. It only exists during the week. So that's like a problem that a lot of people face and they don't know. So, I mean, aside from having metrics in terms of when a line is efficient in a market, I generally like it when there's been resistance at both sides. So, when it's moved up in one direction, down to another, and then it's fought back, and then it's settled, and then it hasn't moved much at a sharp book like Pinnacle, that usually tells me that number is really, really strong. So, it's -258 for on the money line for Minnesota, plus 225 for Tampa Bay. So we'll take the, again, there are very scientific methods to finding very good approximations of what the true line is. But again, I'm not going to bust that out, not only because I do have that information. I do want to find a way to convey it in an appropriate manner to those that are interested in this type of thing. But also too that, by giving away each number, you might be able to discern, I can't let you reverse engineer everything, for those that are listening closely, but the information is available if you do the work, or we can always work something out, and stay tuned for things that we have coming, for lack of a better term. So anyways, the true line is probably Tampa Bay plus 238, 240, and 242, 241, and Minnesota minus 242, 241. Printing money at Minnesota minus 220, printing money at Tampa Bay plus 255. So this is a chalk game again with very little movements. We're going to take Minnesota, and we're going to take or lay the 6 points at home.
Fat Guy, next up, Jacksonville at Indy. Indy 4.5-point dogs at home. 33% of early bettors are on the Colts. Who you got?
We're going to take Jacksonville here. This is another interesting one in terms of what does that team look like? Indy again undergoing changes in coaching and quarterback. There's another thing when I was talking about priors throughout, they know they kind of know a lot of teams. Like the opening odds makers are going to be in tune with a lot of what Kansas City's doing because there's consistency there. They understand what the ceiling and the basement is for the performance. They understand what's most likely to happen in those situations. I can't imagine that there isn't and pretty much every team where there's some sort of stability. I dare to say that Jacksonville falls in that because they have a stable, consistent coach with a good track record and what I would call is a stable quarterback who, like, I don't think you're going to get a high variable performance going forward much with Trevor Lawrence. Beyond like what was kind of a settling period. Of course, he was tied to some very bad coaching. So, like, I think they have a pretty good idea. And don't forget too, it's not just when they take priors. It's not just Jacksonville. Like it's not just Peterson and Trevor Lawrence. It's every iteration of teams that look like it. In poker we call it you don't solve for one player, you solve for a group of players that play like each other. You're not going to get it perfect, but you're going to get it pretty darn close to kind of understanding what that archetype does. So I feel like Jacksonville fits in an archetype that is very modelable, that has very strong priors, and they're going to know what's going to happen. Where an advantage would be is to understanding what Indy would look like, and especially things like the prop market, like Anthony Richardson, understanding his abilities versus certain teams. Those are going to be markets that aren't going to might have some meat on the bone. I can't guarantee that, but that's where I would look. That would be a start of where I would look here. And how you could understand that too is perhaps, another idea would be to take a look at all the closing props for this game in regards to Anthony Richardson, and then and look at and take and jot down also all the look ahead lines for the next week's game for Indianapolis. And then based on that performance, see if there's a large change. Now, what would make that information valuable is if you had a really bad or a really good performance, and then you could kind of see what the adjustment would be like. And then that would give you a good idea of how to get ahead of something and have an idea of like how to raise or lower your expectations accordingly, right? So because they're even if to put it in another perspective, if Trevor Lawrence has a really poor performance, that's not going to change the outlook on Jacksonville, really. It'll be kind of written off as one game, whereas like, this is a first impression for Anthony Richardson. So a lot of numbers going forward are going to be malleable, and they're going to be based heavily and sometimes too heavily on performances like that, And again, if you can find another archetype like Anthony Richardson and see if there's other performances, and if you had, there are websites that do have historical odds. It's another thing that's a big struggle, and I wish that I could. If anybody has access to a large database of reliable historical odds with movements, I'd be more than happy to purchase, because that is another big problem that I do have in my life. But that being said, this is something to watch out for in terms of priors being established for the Indianapolis Colts. And I would take a look, if I were you, at Anthony Richardson prop markets. They are heavily juiced, though, so you do have to kind of know what they're doing. So it's better to just, if you're new to something like this, is to just virtually do it. You don't have to bet. With a pencil and paper, you can sure learn a lot by tracking yourself. And, I use pencil and paper, and, you can use Google Sheets or what have you, and I highly recommend upping your game in that sense. But you can start as low as pencil and paper. The pick, however, is going to be Jacksonville, and we're going to lay the 4.5 points.
Fat guy next up, Tennessee Titans at the New Orleans Saints. Saints -3 at home, 61% of early bettors on the Saints. Anything interesting about this game and the market that's led up to this point?
There's a pretty good money line movement. This is one thing that I find strange here. I don't have an opinion on this game. We're going to take New Orleans just for the contest, I guess, or lack thereof, just for the record. The opening line is -188, and the current line is -166. But -4, it opened at -4 and moved to -3. Now, why do I find that strange? Well, that feels like that 1 point. I guess it's the push on 3. I can kind of understand, but I'm not sure. That just seems like like they're valuing that 1 point a lot. I guess the push. See, that's another thing too, is when you understand these things, you understand how often when you're looking at the implied probabilities between the money line open and close and the movement in congruency with the spread and the total. You can kind of use all those numbers to understand like how likely it's currently at 3, how likely it is that they do land on the number 3. And why would I give this convoluted math problem? Well, perhaps there is a New Orleans to win by 3 prop at a sports book that has it horribly mispriced based on for instance, this is a pretty low total of 40.5, meaning that the chances that New Orleans lands on 3, New Orleans by 3 is probably a pretty high probability. And if that probability is higher than what's being laid to you on a New Orleans by 3 exact score prop, you might be able to find some value there. I'm trying to drop a bunch of tidbits on things that you could do and you could specialize in too. I've only been done a lot of broad strokes on ideas, but if I were you and I wanted to try and make a buck instead of just trying to pick who, because that's another thing about sports betting. When you're an amateur, all you're trying to do is put back your opinions with dollars with no regard for price. When you're trying to elevate your game to actually making money doing this, the whole idea is getting a good number, getting a good price relative to the actual probability. And you could derive a lot from the information that is available to you. And here might be and so if I were trying to make money and I was just starting, I would start, like I said, with a pencil and paper method and just track myself but try and specialize in one market and perhaps understanding, the frequencies of one team winning by specifically an amount, and do your due diligence with every sportsbook. Don't just look at one, look at all of them, see what offers bad numbers, where are they soft. And I can't imagine even this idea, I've done it in the past. That's why I bring it up, but I'm not actively looking at New Orleans by 3. I might, for fun now. That's just that I brought it up. But that's an idea. Figure out how often New Orleans will win by 3 based on these 3 numbers, and then find a book that has, because here's another thing too. A good way of looking is a lot of these sports books, they just put they don't have a stagnant line. So let's just say hypothetically that Kansas City was only 3-point favorites over Detroit. Well, they'll have the same odds set for Detroit or Kansas City to win by 3 as they would with New Orleans to win by 3 in this situation, which is a complete different situation because one has 55 points expected and this one has 40.5. They're not the same situation at all. The points are less valuable as you scale up with the total. So just an idea of where maybe out of laziness, they just charged really high juice thinking nobody can beat it. But if someone was very savvy and knew how to shop, just like the supermarket, they may be able to eke out some profit by the end of the year. So that would be an idea, again, that I would search for. But as far as pick goes, we'll just go New Orleans.
Fat Guy, next up, the Las Vegas Raiders travel to Mile High to take on the Denver Broncos, who are 3.5-point favorites at home. Early bettors are siding with the Broncos. Anything interesting about this market?
Yeah, I think there's another one in terms of we're talking about priors and unknowns. And I tend to think Denver follows in a very strange one in that, there's kind of, I would say, shock maybe from last year. Because this is a good roster. You can't tell me the Denver Broncos don't have a nice roster. They really do. But, that coaching quarterback season, it was disappointing would be an incredible understatement. It was almost shocking. What kind of reminded me of was when the Lakers had, who is it? Nash, Dwight Howard, and Kobe. Is that the worst, probably the most surprising NBA season ever, Big Rye, in your recollection?
Sure, I have no recollection of the season, so
clearly. But anyway, so there might be some sort of Denver might have their expectations a little bit low just because of perhaps an estimation of last season. I mean, that's just an idea. I don't have any foreprocess into, I don't think that's a word, into that idea. But I'm just trying to give you guys ideas of where to look, and this might be one of those cases here. So other than that, I don't have much to say. It opened at minus 185. It's currently minus 198. That's a very, very small movement in win probability. The total has only moved a point, but there's juice on the over, so that's really a half point, if that. So this is kind of a stagnant market. And yeah, we're just going to take Denver and move on.
Next up, Miami at the LA Chargers. 5-star entertainment game. Chargers -3 at home. 60% of early bettors on the Chargers. Fat Guy, has there been any interesting movement in this game as far as the market's concerned?
-140 to -157 for the LA Chargers at home here. I haven't quite kept up with it. The total is kept the exact same though, I always find that strange. So that's another thing you can kind of derive here. Like, where did that half point go? You know what I mean? Like, there's some juice movements on the total. Like, the under went from -112 to even. So, like, you could lose half a point there. I can understand that. And it went from -2.5, and it got juiced up all the way to -130 on the 31st of October. And then they finally moved it, that half point to. This is the other thing too. It moved on the 31st from -2.5, -130 to on September 3rd to -3, -108. Is that a move, or is that just a flip in? That's another thing sportsbooks do, which is something that you kind of have to understand is like risk mitigation amongst numbers. Is they might have a bunch of people taking Miami +2.5. Or so they have a bunch of people Miami +2.5, and then they also want to get people to take LAC -3 at this price. Then if it lands on 3, they win all the Miami money, and then they just push on the LAC money. So also understanding like risk mitigation too. Like a book like Pinnacle, their line movements tell a lot of stories. And this is, don't forget too, I'm reading this. It's not like I have 100% gauge of what they're doing. These are just ideas, right? So, this is a process that's really difficult to understand. It'll probably take a lifetime to understand all the ideas and thoughts, because there's really smart people doing it, and you don't know the money moving in and out. But what I do know is if you do understand what these movements are, what these true prices are from efficient markets, you can make money in the secondary markets and the rec books by using this information. Not actually, that's the other thing. Oh, the Chargers defense, Justin Herbert looks great this year. Any of those ideas are all in the line. I hate to break it to you guys. People that use those as arguments, those aren't arguments. It would be telling me the same, like telling me that the price of chocolate is that way because it's good. Of course, that's what people are willing to pay for it. And it's a terrible analogy, but the point is that those ideas that you hear on the radio, that people hammer home, I knew this, I knew that. They don't know what they don't know, and what they don't know is that they aren't an expert modeler. They're not able to come up with originate strong numbers, so their advice is garbage, for lack of a better term. And I'm throwing shade a lot of indirectly at a bunch of people that I don't know, but it is the truth. And the truth is, if you're not one of those extremely talented, mathematically inclined modelers, a very creative mind that has a lot of time on their hands and money too to do this, you're probably not going to be able to make money. And if you're listening to this channel, and if you bet on sports, you want to make money, but a lot of people deep down, they don't. They just want to back their opinion with dollars. If you actually want to make money, listen to what I'm saying, and you have to do it your own. It's like a weight loss thing. You have to motivate yourself and figure out what angle could I be an expert at, what angle could I understand, and a lot of valuable information is exhibited in these line histories. And that being said, the pick, we're going to take the Miami Dolphins. We're going to take the 3 points and on to Seattle.
Rams at Seattle. Seattle -5.5 point favorites at home. 68% of early bettors on the Seahawks. Fat Guy, has this line been pushed up? I got a feeling it didn't open at 5.5.
It opened at 6 plus 107. Now it's 5.5, 109.
Yeah,
I mean, it's the only thing that's moved is the total. So the totals went down 2 points. But other than that, that must but the money line went from -233 open to minus 235. So not a movement at all. The one thing you could say though is why would the total go down? More than likely, this that probably means like a mutual deficiency in the offense. I don't have every news clip in front of me, but more than likely there's a downgrade in both offenses concurrently because of equal value. Because there's no other way that like the price would be unchanged, but the total would go down. So, or perhaps an inkling of a more defensive game based on preseason. But I have very little to go on something with little news that I know of and a movement of just 2 cents on a money line. So we're just going to take Seattle and on our way to Philly, New England.
Philly, New England. New England plus 3.5 at home. 36% of early bettors on the Pats. Has this line moved at all?
Yeah. So it moved from +5 to +3.5.
Wow. That's a pretty significant movement.
In points, but is it in win probability? Here's the difference. It moved from +192 to +172. So another thing we're talking about push frequencies and things of that nature. Take a look at that's a 1.5 point movement on the spread, but the implied probability moved the same as the half point between 2.5 and 3, if memory serves me correctly, roughly.
Yeah, a little bit less.
Pittsburgh and San Francisco. Yeah, a little bit less. That was a half point. This is a 1.5. So realistically, what does that tell you is that 4 isn't a key number, and you could figure it out mathematically. How often, you can do. There's 2 approaches. There's the frequentist approach, which is we just get all the data from all the games, have a database, and then you'll know how much. The problem is there's sampling problems a lot, and when there's rule changes, i.e. in the NFL with the when they move the PAT rule, that's going to mess up spreads and push frequencies alike. So it's not going to trash all the data before it, but it's certainly going to change it. So that's one difficulty thing. The other way is they call it Bayesian, and kind of using like estimations through other means. I'm not. That's a whole nother subject for a whole nother day. And don't forget, I'm not a mathematician. I'm not extremely versed. I was good at math in high school, and I just took it further. But it's not like a super strength of mine. This is a tool that I have to use. But you could figure out, you could infer the how often it would land on the number 4, and this would again give you a good idea of what the value of a point, which is another very interesting thing when you're betting on any sport, whether it be basketball or NFL football. Football is different because it's non-linear. Like basketball is generally linear. Like how do I say it? Because points are 2s, 3s, and free throw point 1s. Soccer is linear. A goal is 1 or nothing. Football, you have a safety, you have field goals, you have a touchdown. You have a touchdown with a pat, touchdown miss pat, touchdown with a 2-point conversion. So it adds like a whole element of like non-linear distributions in terms of spreads. What I mean by that is you're going to land more on 3 and 7 and 6 now than you are on 4 and 5. And this just is another example of that. And why does this all matter, fat guy? Why are you boring us with the logistics of it? Is I'm trying to help you understand how to make money, and it is not betting spreads like this, but understanding the ideas behind them. And this is an example of what the value of a point is, and 4 is not a valuable amount, and it's unlikely. So another funny one is, say this closes at 4, and perhaps a sportsbook has Philadelphia by 4 specifically priced at the same number as Philadelphia by 6. Say it closes Philadelphia -6 in a different game. You'll understand that the 4 price is a lot worse than the 6 price. It's all understanding numbers and pricing and the probabilities therein. So we're going to take Philadelphia, that being said, and on to Green Bay. How long-winded.
Green Bay at Chicago. Chicago -1. It's a 50-50 split. The public is split on this game. Has the line been split on this game?
Well, it's open at -150, and it's currently -150. And the only interesting part is it opened at -2.5, It is currently minus 2.5, the same juice, but it did dip to 1. And I'm kind of curious as to why did it dip to 1 on August 30th, and then September, it's currently 1. Why did it dip to 1? Just looked at the wrong current.
Which team was minus 150?
Chicago, and they are currently minus 109. Oh, the display in front of me put the dates mixed up. So that is a significant dip. Why? I'm very curious. Why did Chicago go from a small medium favorite to essentially a pick'em? That's very interesting, and I don't have any news to glean from there. That's, here's another thing. In the comment section, if you have an idea, it could be an injury that I've overlooked, but I don't recall any significant injury out of Chicago or any gain by Green Bay. So I'm curious as to why this would be. So this would be another way to incite some sort of comments, is why do you think that on July 10th, it was minus 148, and it's come all the way down to minus 109. Last movement, current line is minus 109 or minus 109 on September 4th. So very interesting stuff. So yeah, that line's about an hour old. Yeah, so I'm kind of curious as to why. I don't actually know. As far as the with the pick we're going to throw out there, it's going to be Green Bay. We're going to follow steam on a bad number, which is a terrible idea. So Green Bay minus 1. And again, these picks are purely for entertainment purposes. It's the knowledge behind them that I'm trying to impart. A bit of a heel turn, as I did say, for this year.
Fat Guy, on to the Sunday night football game. Dallas Cowboys at the New York Giants. Giants 3-point dogs at home. 39% of early bettors are on the Giants. I'm sure there is a healthy number of bets on this game. Has it affected the line at all?
Yeah, this has got to be the most bet game, I would think, just in terms of fan bases. Jets Buffalo might, considering it's isolated on the Monday. There's another thing too, by the way, in terms of volume of bets. Another tidbit. I'm throwing a lot at the wall here. This one, we got to get it all out. I've been caged up for too long. A lot of recreational bettors, the old theory and the old adage is that they try and get even on Monday. So Monday, a lot of times, ends up having just volume based on, we'll call it degeneracy, for lack of a better term, rather than pure interest. And as far as interest goes, I can't imagine this game isn't really number one. There's very low. There's something to note. The lines makers in the betting public are very sour on the New York Giants. And they did feel that despite the Giants being a playoff team, last time I checked, their expected win total, like when you factored in the juice, was like 6 point something, which is quite low considering what you would expect from a team that, had the result last year. So I'm kind of curious as to, this might be another case where, like, did they do feel that they did get very lucky in very key situations last year, which they did. I think they won Big Rye, like every close game pretty much went their way, which is unlikely generally. But this might be another one where the priors might be malleable. Like if the Giants smoke Dallas, like that might adjust a lot of lines going forward. Like I feel like this performance would be, there's a bit more riding on it in terms of numbers being created on the New York Giants, considering like how pessimistic they are in the futures market compared to how they actually did, and nothing's changed realistically. Like they've only got really better, I think. You know what I mean, from a talent perspective, yet their total went down, right? And obviously the teams they play are different, X, Y, and Z, but not a gap that in my recent memory that I can remember is that different, considering very little's changed. So in this game, we're going to be taking Dallas. We're going to take the 3 points, I guess, theoretically. But I would be curious to see if there isn't a malleable reaction to an extreme performance, whether good or bad, by the New York Giants.
And on to Monday night, the Buffalo Bills travel to New York to take on the Jets. Jets plus 2.5 at home, 44% of early bettors on the Jets. Fat Guy, has there been Any line movements in this game?
Yeah, open at 106 for the Jets, plus 106, and now it's plus 122 from 1 point dogs at even money to plus 2.5 at minus 105. See, now here you go. It's at even money versus minus 110. So the Bills are minus 110 at opening, and the Jets are plus 1 at even money. Well, that's not true even money. It's closer to plus 105 in actuality. Whereas, like, here's the easiest calculation in the world. It's Buffalo minus 2.5, minus 105. Jets plus 2.5, minus 105 at Pinnacle. Well, what's the true value there when you remove the juice? Well, it's identical, so you pull it off the exact same. So the true odds is Buffalo minus 2.5 at even money. That's what the true, according to the market at Pinnacle. So, which is always going to have a, margin of error. In tennis, ATP tennis, it's 0.32 on average. That's how off they are in the market, which is like extreme efficiency. I haven't ran the numbers on NFL, but considering I use these numbers all the time to make my decisions, probably should. I don't know why I don't have the information. Probably because I just looked it over because I know it's extremely hard to beat. Point in case, we're 51% over 5-6 years of doing this. So that's I guess it would be the minus 105 juice by a smidgen, but you're not making a living. Let's put it that way. This is when speaking of malleable performances, I did say about Arizona, New York's got to be up there, considering the change in quarterback and various additions to kind of facilitate Rodgers. So, yeah, this is one to look at in terms of look ahead lines and see how they're affected by an extreme. Like, if they have a run of the mill performance, I don't know what that would be, but like a relatively competitive game that's not exceedingly good or bad, you're not going to see any changes in the perception of the New York Jets. But an extremely bad or extremely good performance would taint things going forward, and perhaps they'd be too optimistic or too pessimistic based on this performance. So, in this case, we are going to take the Jets. But again, this is an angle to look out for because, again, the priors for a situation like this are going to be weak compared to Buffalo. You know what you're getting with Buffalo. It'd be hard to argue that prices regarding Buffalo's performance themselves aren't incredibly accurate. Especially when you get two teams that they know, you know what I mean? Like, there's just no way of beating that number, right? Like, you could argue, there's an argument as efficient as Pinnacle's market is, and I just quoted the ATP tennis market. Oh, it's a 0.32% average. I think it's over 8,000 sample, the one that I last looked at. It might be 0.29. Doesn't matter. That's the average. Are there outliers where they're way off? Sure, but those are very rare. But this is a case where it's possible, being week one of the season. This one, and I think Arizona even more so. The only thing about Arizona where maybe that's not true is the ceiling for Josh Dobbs and the talent they have can't be very high, Big Rye. Whereas a gap in performance by the Jets, I honestly think about it, you could see it all. I think that's
the Jets could have 12 wins, they could have 6 wins, and I wouldn't be surprised either way.
It wouldn't be surprised, right? Whereas Arizona is how bad are they? Are they as they're probably are they a 2 to 6 team? You know what I mean? Wins or 1 to 6?
7 or 8 wins would be a surprise for Arizona.
Yes, it would be. But is the true gap 0 to 4? You know what I mean? It's different. See, this is an argument here, right? I don't have a good example on, I don't have a strong beat on it, but that's good though. That's why there might be some sort of inconsistencies in games like that if you did have a good understanding of what is likely to happen with something that has incomplete information.
Fat Guy, on to the lightning round. Detroit at Kansas City.
Detroit Lions.
Houston at Baltimore.
Houston.
Carolina at Atlanta.
Atlanta Falcons.
Cincinnati at Cleveland.
Cincinnati Bengals.
San Fran at Pittsburgh.
Pittsburgh.
Arizona at Washington.
The football team.
Tampa Bay at Minnesota.
Minnesota.
Jacksonville at Indy.
Jacksonville.
Tennessee at New Orleans.
New Orleans.
LV at Denver.
Denver.
Miami at LAC.
Miami.
Rams at the Seahawks.
Seattle Seahawks.
Philadelphia at New England.
Philadelphia.
Green Bay at Chicago.
Green Bay.
Dallas at the New York Giants for Sunday.
Dallas.
And then Buffalo at the New York Jets for Monday Night Football.
And the large probability band Jets.
So even though we're picking all of these games, it's very, very unlikely that either of us is going to make a bet on a spread for week 1. That's a good point too.
Yeah.
Remember, guys, for the contest, make your picks against the spread for week 1 at Big Rye at thefatguy.com. Fat Guy, that is it. Week 1 in the books. I know we talked about, maybe condensing this, making this shorter, and this video is just eclipsed 1 hour.
This is all my fault. I'll promise to do better next time.
Oh, you did great. So much insight. If you stuck around this long, congratulations, guys. Fat Guy dropped a ton of good knowledge, or at least alluded to a ton of good knowledge. So make sure to follow along with us this year, like, subscribe, all that good stuff.
You can always comment in, and I'll try my best to be as reciprocal as... I'll try and reciprocate as best as humanly possible, but, we'll see how it goes, and hopefully we can develop some things that make all of these concepts a lot easier.
But that's it for us, guys. Good luck for your week 1 picks against the spread, and see you guys soon.